Hello everyone, welcome to the Raaonline lecture series on neurophysiology. We have seen so many functions of the brain which has got specific input, specific output, specific areas of the brain have been devoted for particular functions and those functions can be easily mapped and traced. Okay, but there are certain functions in the brain which is quite complex to understand. The input and output relationship is also very diffuse for those functions. All those functions are put together under the inverted commas higher mental functions. Okay, so we'll be seeing about two important higher mental functions of our brain, that is learning and memory. So in this session, we'll be seeing about learning and memory separately. Though they are dealt separately, often they go together. Okay, so learning, we'll see about definition and what are the mechanisms of learning, like for example, associative learning mechanisms, non-associative learning mechanisms. Similarly, in the memory, we'll be seeing about the definition and classification. There are different types of classification of memory. We'll be seeing all those things. Certain models of memory that has been proposed to explain the events that is occurring in the memory. Molecular basis of memory, and how the memory is formed, that is the process of encoding, and how the intercortical or interhemispherical transfer of memory happens, little bit of applied aspects, that is the altered memory status in certain diseases. All those things we'll be seeing in this session. First we'll see about learning. Now what is learning basically? Something we are doing and because of that our behavior changes. That is called as learning. So by definition, it is the ability to alter the innate behavior with respect to the past experience by acquisition of some information. That is called as learning. After the process of learning, there should be a change in the behavior or production of new behavior should be there. That is learning. Mechanisms of learning includes two important types. One is associative mechanisms, the other one is non-associative mechanisms. By the name associative mechanisms means the learning is happening when it is associated with some other event, say some other stimulus. Okay, so for example, classical conditioning, operant conditioning are the mechanisms for associative learning. There is non-associative learning where the learning happens in its own or by voluntary will. Okay, non-associative mechanisms means the learning happens by our own will and the behavior changes as a consequences of the learning process. Okay, so that is non-associative mechanisms which include two important processes, that is habituation and sensitization. Before going into the conditioning, that is the different mechanisms of learning, we'll see what is this unconditioned reflex. Certain response, it comes automatically. Okay, it is all inborn. These are all the mechanisms or the responses which occur after the stimulus is, I'm repeating the slide. Now, before going into the mechanisms of learning, there are certain things that is present inborn. These are called as unconditioned reflex. So, if an appropriate stimulus is given to an individual, the response occurs automatically. So, these are called as unconditioned reflex. Have you ever been bitten by an ant? What will you do? Immediately, we will remove the ant by dusting it away. Okay? That happens without our thought process. Similarly, if you happen to see a bright light, suddenly what will happen? What do you do? Immediately, we will do like this or we'll close the eyes. Okay? This happens as a reflex. If you have a mouthful of water, what will you do? Immediately will swallow it. Okay. So all these happen. The deglutition, that is swallowing, is a reflex. Okay. Constriction of the pupil is a reflex. Okay. Removal of the painful stimulus is a reflex. Okay. So all these are inborn reflexes. So these reflexes are maybe superficial or deep based upon the location of the receptors. All the tendon reflexes are inborn reflexes. Some reflexes may be present within the viscera. These are called as organic reflexes. For example, the deglutition reflex, baroreceptors, osmoreceptor reflex, thirst mechanism. All these are unconditioned reflexes which are present inborn. These need not be trained by an external stimulus. Okay, coming to the conditioned reflex. This is studied in detail by a very famous scientist, Ivan Pavlov. He did a lot of experiments with his dog and different types of stimuli and how he can condition the dog for various physiological aspects. Okay, so what is this conditioned reflex? This is presenting two stimuli close together so that the response will be transferred from an usual appropriate stimulus to a different stimulus. That is called as conditioning. So this is the Pavlov's experiment. So before conditioning, usually the dog salivated when you present the dog with a food. Okay, so that food is called as the unconditioned stimulus or US, and the salivation, that is the response from the dog, is the unconditioned response. Okay, UR, we depict as UR. Okay, whereas when you present the dog with just a neutral stimulus like a metronome or a bell sound, this does not produce any response. Okay, this stimulus is called as conditioned stimulus, which when presented alone will not produce any response, that is salivation from the dog. So what happens during conditioning? Every time you give the dog with the, every time you give the dog the meal, before that you ring a bell. Okay, so this ringing a bell followed by the food is repeated so many times. So this is called as conditioning. Okay, and after the food is given, the response, the salivation will occur in the dog. But after some time, what happens? Even if you don't give the food, if you just ring the bell, the dog started salivating. Okay, so this is called as conditioned response to a conditioned stimulus. Okay, this is called as classical conditioning.